Before we get into what happened, let me tell you about the man Niklaus Ethan Carter used to be. Not the man he became after everything fell apart. Not the man you'll see standing in a courtroom with a lawyer who makes Nicole's team look like they're playing checkers. I mean the man he was on a Tuesday morning in a modest house in Atlanta, Georgia, frying eggs in a cast-iron skillet, humming a song his mother used to sing, genuinely happy. Niklaus was 43 years old, 6 feet of quiet confidence, the kind of man who never needed to raise his voice because when he spoke, people listened anyway. He taught economics at Meridian Charter High School for 11 years. Not because it paid well, it didn't, but because Niklaus Carter had a theory. He believed that if you could teach a 17-year-old from the West End of Atlanta how money actually worked, you could change everything about how they saw the world. His students called him Mr. Carter. His colleagues called him the best teacher on staff. His mother, Loretta, called him her miracle. And his wife, Olivia, used to call him the love of her life. Used to. Olivia Carter was 39, beautiful in the way that made strangers stop mid-sentence. Sharp cheekbones, warm brown skin, a smile that could soften concrete. When Niklaus met her 12 years ago at a community fundraiser on Auburn Avenue, she was laughing at something her friend said, and he stood across the room thinking, that woman is going to change my life. He was right. He just didn't know which direction the change would go. For the first 7 years, their marriage was the kind people whispered about with admiration. They weren't rich. Niklaus taught school. Olivia ran a small event planning business out of their spare bedroom. They drove used cars, ate home-cooked food 5 nights a week, and took 1 vacation a year, always somewhere they'd never been, always with a budget they'd saved for all year. But they were together in a way that mattered. Niklaus remembered the exact night Olivia came home crying because she'd lost a major client, and he sat on the kitchen floor with her until midnight, both of them leaning against the cabinets, talking through every option. That was the night she said, "You make hard things feel survivable, Niklaus." He held that memory like a lantern for years. But something shifted around year 8. Slowly. The way seasons change, you don't notice until one day you realize you've been wearing the wrong clothes for months. Olivia's business started growing. Dramatically. She landed a corporate contract with a hospitality group that needed event management across 4 southeastern states. Suddenly, she was traveling, meeting people, moving in circles that Niklaus, with his teacher's salary and his old Honda Accord, didn't fit into. She started coming home later. She upgraded her wardrobe. She opened a separate business account, which was fine, sensible even, but she stopped talking to Niklaus about money the way they used to. The conversations became surface level. She stopped sitting on the kitchen floor with him. Niklaus noticed all of it. He just told himself it was growth. He told himself he was proud of her. What he didn't tell anyone, not his brother Damon, not his best friend Isaac, not even his mother, was that he had a secret of his own. A big one. See, for the last 6 years, Niklaus Carter had been doing something on the side. Something he never talked about. Something that had nothing to do with teaching and everything to do with what he'd been studying and applying quietly, methodically, with the same discipline he brought to his classroom. He had been investing. Not casually. Not a little money in a savings account. Niklaus had started with the $14,000 he inherited when his father passed. He'd taken a course. Read everything he could. Spent 3 years learning before he spent $1. And then, quietly, without fanfare, without telling a single soul, he began building. He created a private holding company under a legal alias. Not to hide anything illegal, but because Niklaus Carter had watched enough people in his community get exploited the moment they showed money. He wanted to build first. Announced later. His financial advisor, a quiet, sharp man named Gerald Odom, was the only person who knew. By the time Olivia's business started booming, Niklaus's private portfolio was already worth $11 million. By year 10 of their marriage, it was worth $47 million. By year 12, it had crossed the line nobody says out loud. But Niklaus was still frying eggs on Tuesday mornings. Still driving his Honda. Still grading papers on the couch at 9 p.m. while Olivia scrolled through her phone across the room, barely looking up. "You work too hard for what they pay you," she said one evening without looking at him. The same words, almost. The same quiet dismissal. "I love what I do," he said simply. She made a small sound, something between a laugh and a sigh, and went back to her phone. Niklaus set his red pen down and looked at his wife. Really looked at her, for the first time in months. and something in his chest sat very still, the way the air goes quiet right before a storm. He didn't say anything. He picked his pen back up, but he started paying attention. It was a Wednesday night in late October when everything cracked open. Niklaus had stayed late at school for a parent-teacher conference. When he got home, Olivia's car was in the driveway, but the house was dark downstairs. He came in quietly, set his bag by the door, and was heading to the kitchen when he heard her voice from the home office upstairs. She was on the phone, doors slightly open, not whispering, speaking with the comfortable confidence of someone who thought they were alone. "I know, baby. I know. Just be patient." A pause. "Because I can't just leave. Not yet. There are things I'm waiting on." Another pause, then a laugh. Low, warm, the kind Niklaus hadn't heard directed at him in over a year. "Yes, I promise. Soon." Niklaus stood in the hallway. The word soon landed in the center of his chest, like something heavy dropped from a height. He didn't go upstairs. He walked to the kitchen, made himself a glass of water, stood at the counter in the dark for a long time, processing what his ears had just told him while his heart tried to argue it meant something else. It didn't mean something else. He knew that. He just wasn't ready to know it yet. Over the next 3 weeks, Niklaus did what Niklaus always did. He observed. He took notes in his head the way he took notes on a market. Patterns, timestamps, behavioral shifts. Olivia's phone was always face down now. She showered the moment she got home from her late client meetings. She'd started using a second email address on her laptop. He caught the address flashing on the screen one afternoon. She was planning a girls' trip to Savannah in November that she mentioned once and then stopped mentioning entirely. He didn't confront her. Not because he was afraid. Because Niklaus Carter had learned, from investing, from teaching, from life, that the worst thing you can do when you suspect something is act before you have the full picture. He was building his case, the way he built everything. Then came the inheritance. Olivia's aunt, Claudette Briggs, passed away on a Tuesday morning in November. Claudette was a woman Olivia had mentioned only occasionally over the years. A reclusive woman who had never married, no children, who lived quietly in a large home in Birmingham. Olivia hadn't spoken about her much. Attended her Christmas dinners a few times in the early years of the marriage and then gradually stopped going. The call from the estate attorney came on a Friday afternoon. Niklaus was in his classroom when Olivia texted him. "Aunt Claudette left me something in her will." Attorney called. "Meeting Monday." He texted back, "Okay. Want me to come with you?" The reply took 11 minutes. "No, I got it." Niklaus stared at that text for a moment. Then he put his phone in his desk drawer and finished grading his students' midterm papers. Monday came and went. Olivia came home from the attorney's office quieter than Niklaus had ever seen her. Not sad quiet. Not shocked quiet. She was calculating quiet, the kind of quiet that has gears turning behind it. "How did it go?" he asked. "Fine," she said. "I'll tell you about it later." She never told him about it that night, or the next night. 3 days later, while Niklaus was at school, a certified letter arrived at their home addressed to Olivia. He knew because the mail service sent a digital notification to their shared account, a feature Olivia had set up years ago to track packages. That evening, he asked again, "Did something come in the mail?" She barely blinked. "Just some paperwork." Niklaus nodded, went back to his book, but he had already called Gerald Odom that afternoon. "Gerald," he said quietly, standing in the school parking lot after the last bell. "I need you to pull everything together. All of it. Every account, every holding. Clean documentation on all of it. And I need you to do it quietly." Gerald, who had worked with Niklaus long enough to know when to ask questions and when not to, simply said, "Give me a week." Niklaus said, "Thank you." He got back in his Honda and drove home to make dinner. What Niklaus didn't know, what he would only learn weeks later, was the full scope of what Aunt Claudette had left behind. Claudette Briggs had been a very careful, very private woman. She had inherited a portion of family land in Alabama 50 years ago, sold it during a commercial development boom, invested the proceeds through a wealth management firm for 3 decades, and quietly, methodically, accumulated a fortune that nobody in the family knew existed. The estate was valued at $912 million. $912 million, left entirely to Olivia Carter. And from the moment Olivia walked out of that attorney's office on a Monday afternoon in November, she had a plan. Niklaus just didn't know it yet. But he would. The human face is remarkable in what it can hide. Niklaus watched Olivia every day for the 2 weeks after that attorney's meeting, and she performed normal like it was a profession. Dinner conversations, weekend errands, asking him if he'd remembered to pay the water bill. All of it smooth, all of it practiced. If he hadn't heard that phone call in the hallway, if he hadn't noticed the certified letter, if he hadn't spent 11 years studying patterns for a living, he might have believed her completely. But patterns don't lie. People do. He noticed the small things. She started exercising every morning, which was new. She spent 3 evenings at the office late, on days she was supposed to have no events scheduled. She made a hair appointment and a manicure appointment in the same week for the first time in months. She started sleeping with her phone plugged in on her side of the bed, screen down, instead of on the bathroom counter the way she always had. None of it was proof. All of it was signal. Niklaus kept teaching, kept grading, kept frying eggs on Tuesday mornings. And every night before bed, he wrote 3 lines in the small notebook he kept in his school bag. What I observed, what it likely means, what to do next. 12 years of marriage, and Olivia had never once looked inside that school bag. She'd never been particularly interested in what Niklaus was working on. That, too, he had noted. The confrontation came, not because Niklaus forced it, but because Olivia chose her moment. It was a Sunday. Niklaus had just come back from visiting his mother, Loretta, and his brother, Damon, in College Park. He came home to find Olivia sitting at the dining table with 2 cups of coffee, one made the way he liked it, which she hadn't done in months. She was dressed, hair done, and there was something in the arrangement of her that felt like a presentation. "Sit down, Niklaus. I want to talk to you." He set his keys on the hook by the door. He sat down. He picked up the coffee. He waited. "Aunt Claudette left me a significant inheritance," she said. Her voice was measured, almost gentle. "I don't know if you've been wondering, but I've been taking time to process it and talk to attorneys." "How significant?" he asked. She folded her hands. "Very significant. Niklaus, I don't want to get into the exact number right now, but it changes things. It changes a lot of things." He nodded slowly. "Okay. I've been doing a lot of thinking." She looked at the table for a moment, then back up at him. "About us. About what I want my life to look like going forward." A breath. "Niklaus, I know, that we've grown in different directions. I think we've known that for a while. I don't want to spend the next 20 years pretending." The kitchen clock ticked 4 times in the silence. "You want a divorce," Niklaus said. "Not a question. I think it's the right thing," she said. "For both of us. I want to be honest with you. I owe you that much. I owe you that much. 12 years. He noted the language. "Filed it. Is there someone else?" he asked. A half-second pause. "This isn't about someone else. This is about me and what I want." She didn't say no. Niklaus noticed that with the same precision, he noticed everything. "I've already spoken to an attorney," she continued. "I want this to be civil. I'm prepared to be fair to you, Niklaus. I know you've given a lot to this marriage." He looked at her across the table. This woman he had loved with everything he had. This woman he had sat on kitchen floors with. This woman who used to call him at 2 p.m. just to say she was thinking about him. He looked at her, and he felt grief. Real, honest grief. And beneath it, something harder. Something with edges. "Who's the attorney?" he asked. She slid a business card across the table. "Her name is Patricia Owens. She's very good." "I'm sure she is," Niklaus said. He picked up the card, looked at it, set it down. "I'll need to find my own counsel." "Of course." She looked almost relieved, like she'd expected a scene and he'd given her calm instead. "Niklaus, I know this is hard, but I really do think." "Olivia." His voice was quiet. "Steady. I hear you." She stopped talking. "I'll take care of my side," he said. He stood, picked up his coffee cup, rinsed it at the sink, dried his hands with the dish towel the way he always did. Then he picked up his school bag from the counter. "I'm going to go grade papers," he said. And he walked upstairs. He sat at his desk in the small spare room he'd converted into a reading space, opened his notebook, and wrote 4 lines. "She knows about the money. She wants out. She thinks I have nothing. She is wrong." Then he called Gerald Odom. "It's time," Niklaus said. What Olivia did not know, what she could not have imagined in the most elaborate version of her plan, was what Niklaus Carter was worth. But that wasn't even the secret that would change everything. The real secret was where Claudette Briggs's fortune had come from. Claudette had inherited land. That part was true. She had sold it. That was true too. But the explosion of that money, from a modest sum in the 1990s into $912 million over 3 decades, that story had a specific origin point. 30 years ago, a young investment firm in Atlanta had taken a chance on Claudette Briggs's initial deposit of $200,000. They had managed it through 3 market downturns, 2 booms, and one extraordinary series of real estate acquisitions that became the backbone of a commercial portfolio spanning 6 southeastern states. That firm, the one that had quietly, patiently, brilliantly grown Claudette's $200,000 into nearly $1 billion, was called Meridian Capital Partners. It was founded in 2008, during the worst financial crisis in a generation, by an anonymous donor who seeded the fund with his entire inheritance from his late father, $14,000. The anonymous donor's legal alias was Niklaus E. Carter. The truth about Niklaus Carter's money was not complicated. It was just invisible, which is different. In 2005, Niklaus's father, Ethan Carter, passed away from a heart condition at 61 years old. He left Niklaus and his brother Damon each $14,000 and a piece of advice he'd given Niklaus since boyhood. The man who waits and watches beats the man who rushes every time. Niklaus took both gifts seriously. He spent 3 years studying before he touched the money. He took every investing course he could find. He read books until his eyes burned. He found Gerald Odom, then a junior financial advisor at a boutique Atlanta firm, and they began having monthly conversations about the market, about strategy, about patience. In 2008, when the financial world was in freefall and everyone who had money was terrified and everyone who didn't was in despair, Niklaus made his move. He took his $14,000, added $12,000 he'd saved from his first 2 years of teaching, and created a private holding entity under the legal alias he'd established with Gerald's help. He seeded Meridian Capital Partners with $26,000. The name meant something to him. Meridian, the point at the top of an arc. He believed the market was at its lowest point and the only direction was up. He was right. He didn't tell Olivia. They had been dating for 2 years then, not yet married, and Niklaus had a specific reason for his silence. He had watched too many people lose money chasing shortcuts, and he refused to promise anyone anything until he knew exactly what he had. He told himself he would tell her when it was real. When it became real, it had also become a habit. The habit of silence. By the time Niklaus and Olivia married in 2012, Meridian Capital Partners was already worth $3 million. He kept it separate. He kept it quiet. He told himself it was protection for both of them. If the market crashed, Olivia's life wouldn't be affected. If something went wrong with his teaching job, they still had the portfolio. He told himself all of this, and most of it was true. But if Niklaus was honest with himself, and he was, in the quiet moments, part of the reason he never told Olivia was that he was watching her. The way you watch a market. Looking for the moment when the conditions were right. And the conditions, for reasons he couldn't fully name, never felt exactly right. Now he understood why his instincts had been so careful. Gerald Odom's office was in Buckhead, on the 14th floor of a building that looked like every other building until you walked inside and noticed that the receptionist spoke 3 languages and the art on the walls cost more than most people's houses. Niklaus had been coming here for 17 years. He sat in the same leather chair every time. Gerald sat across from him with a portfolio the size of a small suitcase. Total liquid assets as of this morning, Gerald said, sliding a document across the desk, $142 million. Real estate holdings, the commercial properties in Atlanta, Charlotte, Nashville, and Birmingham, appraised last quarter at a combined $418 million. Equity positions, private fund stakes, and bonds, approximately $190 million. Niklaus looked at the document. He already knew these numbers. He reviewed them every month. And the Meridian Capital Fund itself? He said. Gerald nodded. The fund's total value, including Claudette Briggs's original account and all current clients, sits at approximately $1.2 billion. $1.2 billion. Claudette Briggs had been one of Meridian Capital's very first clients. She had been referred by a Birmingham attorney who knew Gerald through a mutual contact in 2009. Her initial deposit of $200,000 had been placed into the fund at a time when Niklaus was still writing the foundational investment strategy himself. Over 30 years, through disciplined management, intelligent acquisition, and consistent reinvestment, Her account had grown to $912 million. The fortune that Olivia had just inherited. Built by the anonymous hand of the husband she had just decided to leave. She doesn't know, Niklaus said. It wasn't a question. Nobody knows, Gerald confirmed. Your alias is held. Your name doesn't appear anywhere in the Briggs estate files. The firm is listed as the manager. Your role as founder and primary architect is protected under the operating agreement. Niklaus sat with that for a moment. Does this affect the divorce? He asked. Gerald leaned back. That depends entirely on what you want to do with the information. Niklaus looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline. At the buildings, some of which he quietly owned pieces of. At a city that had watched him drive his Honda to school every morning for 11 years without knowing what he carried. Not yet, Niklaus said quietly. Let it breathe. Let her move. Gerald studied him. Niklaus. When she finds out. She'll find out, Niklaus said. But she'll find out the right way. At the right time. He stood, buttoned his jacket. Set up a meeting with an attorney. The best divorce attorney in Atlanta. That would be Raymond Carter, Gerald said without hesitation. Get him, Niklaus said. And he walked out. Meanwhile, Olivia was moving. Within 2 weeks of the conversation at the dining table, she had retained Patricia Owens, one of Atlanta's most aggressive family law attorneys, and filed divorce papers citing irreconcilable differences. She requested the marital home. She requested a financial disclosure from Niklaus. Standard procedure. What happened next showed Niklaus exactly who Olivia had become. He learned from Raymond Carter, who had his own intelligence network of former colleagues and courthouse contacts, that Olivia had already told several of their mutual friends her version of the story. Niklaus was a good man, but limited. He had never been ambitious enough. She had outgrown him. The inheritance had simply clarified what she'd already known for years. She didn't mention the other man. She never did. But his name came through Raymond's network anyway. His name was Tariq Calloway, 36 years old. Commercial real estate broker with a reputation for charming wealthy clients. He had been in Olivia's orbit for 14 months. The late client meetings had a face now. Niklaus looked at Tariq's photo for about 10 seconds and then closed the file. He didn't feel rage. He felt something colder and quieter than rage. The kind of feeling that doesn't shout. It just waits. She's already started spending, Raymond's paralegal confirmed in a Thursday briefing. She's placed an offer on a property in Buckhead, $6.2 million. She's retained 2 additional financial advisors separate from the estate attorneys. She's moving fast. Of course she is, Niklaus said. And she filed for the financial disclosure, Raymond said. She expects to find a teacher's savings account and a retirement fund. Maybe a small life insurance policy. And instead, Raymond's associate said, half smiling. Niklaus looked at Raymond. Let's give her what she's looking for. For now. He paused. And prepare the counter-filing. Raymond leaned forward. Niklaus, when the full disclosure drops in this case, it's going to be, I want you to understand, it's going to be one of the most significant financial revelations in Atlanta family court history. I know, Niklaus said simply. You're ready for that. Niklaus thought of Olivia across the dining table. The coffee made the way he liked it. Her hands folded, the practiced gentleness in her voice. I owe you that much. I've been ready, he said, for a long time. The first thing Olivia bought with her inheritance money was the house. $6.2 million for a 5-bedroom stone estate in Buckhead with a chef's kitchen, a pool house, and a view of the city that felt like a declaration. She closed on it in December, 8 weeks after the attorney's meeting, and hosted a small gathering of close friends the same weekend. Niklaus heard about the party from Damon, who heard about it from a mutual acquaintance. You doing okay? Damon asked on the phone that Sunday. I'm good, Niklaus said. Man, Damon said. His voice had weight in it. You need to let me come up there. I'm good, Damon. I promise. She's out here buying mansions while you're still at that school. I'm still at that school because I love my students, Niklaus said. Which was true. Everything else is moving the way it needs to move. Trust me. Damon was quiet for a moment. Then, you know something she doesn't know. It wasn't a question. Damon knew his brother. Niklaus almost smiled. I'll call you next week. The financial disclosure hearing was scheduled for the second week of January. Raymond Carter had prepared a filing that was, by design, released in 2 phases. Phase 1 was what Olivia expected. Teacher's retirement account, a small savings fund, a shared marital account with $41,000 in it. A 10-year-old Honda Accord with 82,000 miles. Patricia Owens reviewed it and, according to Raymond's contact at the courthouse, called it straightforward. Olivia had reportedly been pleased. She offered Niklaus a settlement, $200,000 cash, the Honda, and a release of any claims to the inheritance, which, under Georgia law, was considered separate property received by one spouse and therefore not subject to division. $200,000. For a 12-year marriage. The number sat in Raymond's conference room like a deliberate insult. "She think that's generous," Raymond said, not trying to hide his expression. "She thinks I should be grateful," Niklaus said. "Are you going to respond to the offer?" "Not yet," Niklaus said. Phase 2. Phase 2 of the financial disclosure was filed 3 days after the initial hearing. It was a full, detailed accounting of Niklaus Ethan Carter's personal financial holdings, private investment portfolio, real estate assets, fund equity stakes, and his role as founder and primary architect of Meridian Capital Partners, the very fund that had grown Olivia's inherited fortune. Raymond Carter personally walked the filing to the courthouse. He later said the clerk looked at the cover page and paused in a way he'd never seen a courthouse clerk pause before. Patricia Owens received her copy at 2:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. By 2:31 p.m., Raymond's office received a call requesting an urgent meeting. By 4 p.m., Olivia had called Niklaus's cell phone 3 times. He didn't answer. He was in his classroom, helping a student named Jasmine work through a supply and demand problem on the whiteboard. "You're almost there," he told Jasmine. "Look at where the curves intersect." His phone buzzed in his pocket for the 4th time. He left it there. What Olivia had discovered, through the documents and through Patricia Owens's increasingly strained voice on the phone, was this. Her husband, the schoolteacher with the old car and the pressed khakis, was worth approximately $750 million in personal assets. And the fund that had grown her aunt's $200,000 into $912 million? He had built it. He was the anonymous architect, the quiet hand behind 30 years of meticulous, patient, intelligent growth. The man who had taken $14,000 from his late father and turned it into one of the most successful private wealth management funds in the southeastern United States. The money she was spending, the mansion in Buckhead, the plans for travel, the future she was building with Tariq Calloway, was money that, at its very foundation, had been nurtured by the mind and discipline of the man she had just offered $200,000 to disappear. The irony didn't land gently. Patricia Owens spent 40 minutes on the phone with Olivia that evening. Niklaus didn't know the exact content of that call, but Raymond's network painted a picture. Olivia had been quietly hysterical in a way that only wealth can make someone. Not sadness, not guilt, panic, because now the landscape had completely changed. Now it wasn't a simple inheritance versus a teacher's savings account. Now it was 2 colossal fortunes, both, in different ways, tied to the same quiet man. And Georgia law, as Patricia Owens would have already explained, was not going to be simple about this. Tariq Calloway reportedly did not answer his phone that evening. Niklaus drove home from school the same way he always did. Stopped at a traffic light on Martin Luther King Jr. Drive and looked out the window at the neighborhood he'd grown up driving through. Thought about his father. Thought about $14,000 and a piece of advice. The man who waits and watches beats the man who rushes every time. He pulled into the small rental house he'd moved into after leaving the marital home, a modest 2-bedroom in East Point that his mother had immediately tried to upgrade. "Baby, you don't have to live like this," Loretta had said, looking around. "I know, Mama," he'd told her, "but I need to live like this right now." She had looked at him, really looked at him, the way only mothers can. "You got a plan?" He'd smiled. "I got a plan." He went inside, made himself dinner, opened his notebook. "She knows. Everything shifts now. Stay the course." He sat at his small kitchen table and ate slowly, alone, while somewhere on the other side of the city, in a $6 million house with marble floors and a pool nobody was swimming in, his wife sat with the weight of what she'd done and what she hadn't yet faced. 3 days after the disclosure, Olivia came to Niklaus. Not through attorneys, not through emails. She showed up at the school, which he had not expected. He saw her car in the parking lot when he walked out at 4:15 p.m., and he slowed his stride for just a moment before continuing at the same pace. She was leaning against a late-model silver BMW he'd never seen before. New. She was wearing a coat he didn't recognize either. Everything about her, right down to the shoes, was new. And she looked, beneath the clothes, beneath the surface, like someone who hadn't slept in 3 days. Niklaus. Her voice was different. The practiced gentleness was gone. What was left underneath was something rawer. Can we talk? Of course, he said. He gestured to the bench outside the building's main entrance. They sat. He set his bag at his feet. He waited. She looked at her hands. How long? She asked. He didn't pretend not to understand. 6 years of serious growth. But the foundation goes back 17 years. She closed her eyes briefly. And Aunt Claudette's money. I didn't know it was Claudette's account, he said. Which was true. Clients are confidential. I didn't know until Raymond pulled the estate documents and cross-referenced the fund records. I found out the same week you filed. She looked at him. Why didn't you ever tell me? The question hung in the cold December air. A car pulled out of the parking lot. A student waved at Niklaus from the sidewalk. He waved back. I was going to, he said. And this was also true. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. At first I didn't know if it would work. Then I was protecting us from expectation. Then I was, he paused. Chose the next words carefully. Then I was watching, Olivia. The way you watch something to understand what it really is. She swallowed hard. That's not fair. No, he agreed. 12 years, and you offered me $200,000 to go away quietly. That's not fair either. Her eyes filled. She pressed her lips together. Niklaus, I'm not trying to make you cry, he said, and his voice was even, almost gentle. I'm just being honest with you. The way you said you were being with me. She was quiet for a long moment. Is there any version of this where she stopped herself. Where we what, he said. I don't know. She shook her head. I don't know why I even came here. He did know. She came because the ground had disappeared beneath her plan, and she was looking for something solid. She came because despite everything, somewhere in the 12 years they had shared, there was still a gravity between them. Not simple, not clean, but real. He felt it too. He wasn't made of stone. This woman had been his person. He had loved her completely, and that love didn't vanish because she disappointed him. It changed shape. It went underground. But it was still there, quiet and complicated. You came, he said, because you're scared. And because some part of you remembers who we were. He looked at the sky for a moment. I remember it too. But Olivia, I needed a partner. Not someone managing me. She didn't answer for a while. When she did speak, her voice was barely above a whisper. I was wrong. The way I handled this. All of it. I was wrong. Yeah, Niklaus said. Simple. No rage. No cruelty. She looked at him with something that might have been the closest she'd come to genuine grief. What happens now? The attorneys work it out, he said. He picked up his bag. But I want you to know, I never wanted to destroy you, Olivia. I just couldn't let you erase me. He stood. She stayed on the bench, coat pulled around her. Take care of yourself, he said. And he walked to his Honda and drove home. That night Niklaus sat at his kitchen table for a long time without turning on the television or opening his notebook. He thought about the 14-year-old version of himself listening to his father talk about patience while they watched a baseball game in the living room of their house in College Park. He thought about Olivia on a dance floor in 2010, laughing at something he'd said, turning to find him and her face lighting up in a way that he'd carried in his chest for years. He thought about how love doesn't just end. It leaves traces, residue, the way a fire leaves warmth in the walls long after the flames are gone. He sat with all of that. He let it be complicated. He didn't pretend it wasn't real. Then he got up, washed a single dish, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed, steady. Tariq Calloway made his mistake in February. Niklaus didn't go looking for it. It came the way a lot of true things come, through a chain of small, observable events that add up to something undeniable. Tariq, as it turned out, had a problem. Multiple problems, actually. Raymond Carter's investigative team had been quietly assembling a profile since November, and by February it was detailed enough to qualify as a portrait. Tariq Calloway was not what he presented himself to be. Yes, he was a commercial real estate broker, but he was also someone who had a pattern, a documented, repeated pattern, of forming relationships with women who had recently come into significant money. A divorce settlement in Savannah in 2018. An inheritance case in Charlotte in 2020. Documented, civil cases, no criminal charges, but a clear behavioral signature. He was charming, patient, and methodical in a way that Niklaus recognized with professional appreciation and personal disgust. He had been working Olivia for 14 months. The timing, beginning his pursuit around the time Claudette Briggs's health began declining, suggested, Raymond said carefully, that Tariq had been aware of the potential inheritance before Olivia herself knew its scope. How is that possible? Niklaus asked. Raymond's investigator, a quiet woman named Carla, leaned forward. Claudette Briggs used an estate planning firm in Birmingham that also had a satellite office in Atlanta. Tariq's brokerage shared a building with that firm's Atlanta office for 2 years. There's a common administrative assistant. She paused. Information travels in ways it shouldn't sometimes. Niklaus looked at the file, at the documented timeline, at the photo of Tariq at a networking event in September, 6 weeks before Claudette passed, standing next to the estate attorney who had called Olivia. He was positioned, Niklaus said quietly. Almost certainly, Carla said. Niklaus sat back. He felt something unfamiliar move through him, not for himself, but for Olivia. She had traded 12 years of a real marriage for a performance, a calculation in a tailored suit. He almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Does she know? He asked. She doesn't know what we know, Raymond said. But there's been friction. He's already pushed her on a joint investment. Wants access to the inheritance funds for a commercial development project. She hesitated. They argued. Niklaus nodded slowly. When the full picture comes out in the courtroom, she's going to realize she was played, Raymond finished. By both sides of her plan. The room was quiet. I want it presented correctly, Niklaus said. Not to destroy her. To give her the full truth. Raymond looked at him steadily. You know not everyone would handle this the way you are. I know, Niklaus said. But I'm not everyone. The deposition that broke everything open happened on a Thursday morning in March. Tariq Calloway, summoned to give a deposition regarding the timeline of his relationship with Olivia Carter, arrived in a sharp suit with an attorney who looked more nervous than he did. Carla sat to Raymond's right. Niklaus was not in the room, by design. He was at school, teaching a class on compound interest. The deposition lasted 4 hours. In it, Tariq denied knowing about the inheritance before Claudette passed, denied any connection to the estate planning firm, denied awareness of the administrative assistant. Every denial, according to Raymond's detailed notes, smooth as practice. Then Raymond asked a specific question about a specific date, a networking event in September, and cross-referenced it with a hotel check-in record from the same weekend. Tariq's attorney called for a recess. When they came back, Tariq's attorney requested a revised statement. By the end of the afternoon, through a combination of documented evidence and what Raymond described as a man who realized the walls had already closed, Tariq had confirmed. He had been aware of the potential scope of the Briggs estate before Claudette's death. He had positioned himself to be in Olivia's orbit deliberately. He had framed the development deal to secure access to the inheritance funds as quickly as possible. He had, in Raymond's precise language, conducted a calculated pursuit of a vulnerable target. Olivia received the transcript of the deposition that evening through Patricia Owens. She called Patricia back 18 minutes later. Patricia's office, that evening, declined all further contact from Tariq Calloway's number on Olivia's behalf. By the following Monday, Olivia had issued a statement through Patricia that she was ending her personal relationship with Tariq and requesting that he vacate the Buckhead property where he had been spending the majority of his time. He left, took several expensive items that had been purchased with inheritance funds. Olivia's attorneys filed a civil claim the next day. Niklaus found out the following afternoon in a call from Raymond. She's removed him, Raymond said. Niklaus exhaled slowly. He was sitting in his car in the school parking lot after the final bell. Okay, he said. You're not surprised? No, Niklaus said. A man like Tariq only holds as long as the illusion holds. Once the evidence came, he couldn't sustain it. How do you feel? Raymond asked, which wasn't a typical lawyer question, but Raymond Carter had stopped being just Niklaus's lawyer sometime around month 3. He was something closer to a witness. Niklaus thought about it honestly. I feel like a man watching a storm he saw coming from a long way off finally arrive. Not happy about the damage, but not surprised. The courtroom is in 6 weeks, Raymond said. Are you ready? Niklaus looked through his windshield at the school building, at the light in the third-floor window that was his classroom. I'll be ready, he said. Here is something the story requires honesty about. Olivia Carter was not a monster. She was a woman who had grown afraid. Afraid that her ambitions were bigger than her marriage. Afraid that Niklaus's contentment with a modest life meant she was trapped in it. Afraid that the window for the life she wanted was closing. Those fears were real, and she had handled them in ways that were wrong. Deeply wrong, but the fears themselves were human. By March, with Tariq gone and the deposition documents spread across her kitchen table in the Buckhead house that suddenly felt enormous and very empty, Olivia was sitting with herself in a way she had avoided for a long time. Her best friend since college, a woman named Hannah, came over on a Thursday evening with takeout and the specific kind of silence that only someone who has known you for 20 years can provide. They sat on the kitchen floor, expensive kitchen, marble tiles, and Hannah didn't say "I told you so," even though she could have said it 12 different ways. "I knew," Olivia said finally, staring at the container of food she'd barely touched. "I knew something was wrong with Tariq. I felt it. There were moments where the math didn't add up, but I told myself I was being cynical." Hannah nodded. "And Niklaus?" Olivia shook her head slowly. "I looked at that man every day for 12 years, and I decided I knew exactly what he was. I decided the story of him." She pressed her palm flat against the cold marble floor. "I was so wrong." "Yeah," Hannah said, with all the love in the world. "I offered him $200,000. She said it like a person acknowledging a wound they'd caused. Like he was someone who'd done me a favor. Like 12 years was. She couldn't finish the sentence. Hannah looked at her. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know what I can do," Olivia said. "He's not wrong to fight this. I'm the one who filed." She was quiet for a moment. "I just keep thinking, if I had just talked to him. If I had sat across from that man who sat on the kitchen floor with me in year 3 when I was a disaster. If I had just talked to him like he was my partner." She stopped. Hannah reached over and put her hand over Olivia's. They sat on the kitchen floor for a long time. Not because they were in despair, because sometimes that's where the most honest thinking happens. Olivia called Patricia Owens on a Friday morning. "I want to change our approach," she said. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "Change it how?" "I want to be fair," Olivia said. "Actually fair. Not strategically fair. I want to account for everything Niklaus built during this marriage. The full picture. Olivia, your legal position is actually strong. The inheritance is separate property." "Patricia," her voice was firm, "I hired you to represent me. I'm telling you what I want. The full picture. Whatever that means legally, I want to know what fair actually looks like." There was a long pause. "Okay," Patricia said. "I'll need to sit down with Raymond Carter's team." "Set it up," Olivia said. And she hung up. It wasn't redemption in a single phone call. It wasn't a clean transformation. But it was the first honest move Olivia had made in months. And the truth has a way of rewarding the people who move toward it, however late. The first day of the hearing in Atlanta Family Court drew a gallery of observers that the bailiff said he hadn't seen since a case involving a professional athlete 4 years ago. Word had moved through Atlanta's legal and business communities in the way word always moves through tight networks, selectively, quickly, and slightly distorted. What people knew was that a schoolteacher was divorcing his wife over a lottery. No, an inheritance. No, something more complicated than either. The exact details were still behind closed doors. Niklaus arrived at the courthouse in a gray suit he'd bought specifically for this occasion. Not expensive loud, just right. He walked in with Raymond Carter beside him and took his seat at the plaintiff's table without drama. Olivia arrived in a dark blue dress, her attorney beside her. She looked across the room at Niklaus, and he met her gaze steadily. Neither of them looked away for a moment. Then they both looked forward. Judge Alicia Monroe, 52, former commercial litigator, with a reputation for patience followed by precision, entered, and the room rose. "Be seated," she said. She opened the first folder. "This is the matter of Niklaus Ethan Carter and Olivia Carter. We're here to address the financial disclosures filed by both parties and their implications for the settlement." "Counselors." Raymond stood, calm, measured. "Your Honor, what this case presents is the story of two simultaneous financial realities that the parties were not fully transparent with each other about, and whose intersection creates a question of profound legal and equitable importance." He laid out the first reality, Niklaus's financial portfolio, the founding of Meridian Capital Partners, the growth from $26,000 to a holding company worth over $750 million, built during the marriage, funded by separate premarital capital. The gallery was very quiet. He laid out the second reality, Claudette Briggs's fortune, and the mathematical certainty that without Meridian Capital's management, without Niklaus's foundational work, that inheritance would have been approximately $40 million, not 912. He set a document on the projector screen, a detailed financial modeling analysis performed by an independent firm. The inheritance, as received by Mrs. Carter, is worth $912 million. Without Meridian Capital's management, that same account would be worth, at comparable market performance, approximately $38 to $44 million. The difference, approximately $870 million, is the direct result of Niklaus Carter's intellectual labor, strategic decisions, and the fund he built during the course of this marriage. Patricia Owens made her counterargument well. The inheritance was separate property. Claudette's choice to invest with Meridian was her own. Niklaus's role was not as a family member, but as a fund manager, and the management relationship was arm's length. Both arguments were strong. Judge Monroe listened to both with her hands folded on the desk. Then she asked Niklaus a question directly. Mr. Carter, given the confidentiality of your fund's operations, you had no knowledge that Mrs. Carter's aunt was a client of yours. Correct, Your Honor. If you had known, would it have changed anything about how you managed the account? No, Your Honor. Every client receives the same discipline. And you're seeking, she glanced at the filing, not a share of the inheritance itself, but recognition of the marital investment asset, your fund, as joint marital property subject to equitable division. That is correct. The judge nodded slowly. She looked at both attorneys. I want to address something before we proceed to arguments on the equitable division request. She looked across the room. Is there any possibility of a negotiated settlement in this matter? Raymond and Patricia exchanged a look. Patricia leaned to Olivia. Olivia looked across the room at Niklaus. Niklaus looked at Raymond. Raymond gave a single quiet nod. Your Honor, Patricia Owens said, my client has requested the opportunity to make a direct statement to the court. The judge raised an eyebrow, but nodded. Proceed. Olivia stood. She held a single piece of paper, but she didn't read from it. She looked at Judge Monroe, then, briefly, at Niklaus. I came into this proceeding believing that the story was simple, she said. Her voice was steady but real. I was wrong about that, and I was wrong about a lot of things before I filed. I want the court to know that I am no longer pursuing the approach I entered this case with. I am asking my attorneys to work with Mr. Carter's counsel to find a settlement that is genuinely equitable, not strategic, genuinely fair. A pause. I owe that much, and I understand now what it means to actually owe it. The gallery shifted. Judge Monroe studied her for a moment. Then she looked at Raymond. Mr. Carter? Raymond stood. Mr. Carter is open to good faith settlement discussions, Your Honor. The judge nodded. I'm going to recess these proceedings for 21 days to allow the parties to attempt a mediated settlement. If no agreement is reached, we reconvene and I will rule. She closed her folder. Court is in recess. The gavel came down, and for a moment, the room breathed. The mediation took 14 days. It was not simple. It was not painless. There were sessions that ran past 9 p.m. and sessions where both attorneys' voices got tight and controlled. But there was something different in this process than there had been in any moment of the previous 4 months. Both people in the room were trying to be honest. Not strategic. Not adversarial. Honest. Niklaus was represented by Raymond. Olivia by Patricia. A mediator named Dr. Walter Briscoe, a retired judge, sat at the head of the table and moved through the documents with the patience of someone who had seen everything. The foundational agreement came in day 4. Niklaus's fund, Meridian Capital Partners, had been built during the marriage using separate premarital capital, but its operation, growth, and management had constituted a marital economic contribution of the highest magnitude. George's equitable distribution framework didn't strictly entitle Olivia to a share, but the mediation was about equity, not just law. Patricia acknowledged what Olivia had already privately acknowledged. The inheritance as received was worth $870 million more than it would have been without Niklaus's work. That delta had to be part of the conversation. Niklaus, for his part, made a decision that surprised everyone in the room except Raymond. I don't want half of the inheritance, he said on day 6, sitting across the table from Olivia for the first time in the mediation after their attorneys had separated them for the first 5 days. That's not what this is about. Olivia looked at him. Then what do you want? He held her gaze. I want what I built recognized. My fund. My portfolio. Those are mine, built before and during this marriage, and I will not leave this process with less than what I came in with. That's not in dispute, Patricia confirmed. Second, Niklaus said, I want the historical management contribution acknowledged, not as a financial claim against the inheritance. As a matter of record. He paused. Claudette Briggs trusted Meridian Capital with her money. That trust produced your inheritance. That fact should exist in the formal record of this settlement. Olivia was quiet. Then, agreed. Third, Niklaus said. He reached into the folder in front of him and pushed a document across the table. I want this. Patricia and Olivia both looked at it. It was a proposed endowment. $25 million to be jointly funded from Niklaus's holdings and, if Olivia agreed, a matched contribution from the inheritance to create the Ethan Carter Education Foundation, named for Niklaus's father, focused on financial literacy and economic empowerment programs for public school students in Atlanta. Olivia read it. Then she read it again. You're using the divorce, she said slowly, to fund schools. I'm using the opportunity, Niklaus said, to do something that matters. The question is whether you want your name on it. Olivia looked at Patricia. Patricia had nothing legal to say about this. It wasn't a legal move. It was a human one. Yes, Olivia said. Her voice was different when she said it. Something in it that had been missing for months. Yes, I want my name on it. The final settlement terms reached on day 14. Niklaus retained full ownership of Meridian Capital Partners and all personal investment holdings, totaling $750 million. The fund's historical role in the growth of the Briggs estate was entered into the formal settlement record. Olivia retained the Buckhead property and the inheritance, with a structured philanthropic contribution of $25 million matched by $25 million from Niklaus's holdings to establish the Ethan Carter Education Foundation. No cash settlement. No punitive claims. A clean severance of the marital estate. They signed on a Thursday afternoon. Raymond and Patricia shook hands. Dr. Briscoe gathered his papers. Niklaus and Olivia sat across from each other as the room slowly emptied. I'm sorry, she said finally. Quietly. Without her attorney. Without performance. Just the words. He nodded. I know. Do you ever? She stopped. Started again. Do you ever think about who we used to be? Yes, he said. Does it hurt? He considered the question with the same seriousness he brought to everything. Yeah, he said. It does. But that doesn't mean we made the wrong decision. Sometimes the most honest thing is knowing when something is finished. She looked at him. In her eyes, something that had been armored for months was open now. Tired. Real. You deserved better from me, she said. I did, he agreed. Simply. Not cruelly. Just truthfully. And you deserved a partner who was fully present with you. I wasn't always. I carried things alone I should have shared. He was quiet for a moment. We both have things to carry. She nodded. They sat there for a little while longer, two people at the end of something, holding it properly instead of dropping it and walking away. Then Niklaus picked up his folder and stood. Take care of yourself, Olivia. You too, Niklaus. He walked out of the conference room, into a hallway that smelled like carpet and recycled air, and then through the building's glass doors into a February afternoon with weak winter sun that felt, for just a moment, like the start of something. 6 months after the settlement, Atlanta knew Niklaus Carter's name. Not because he announced himself. Because the Ethan Carter Education Foundation launched its first cohort of financial literacy programs across 12 public schools in the city, and someone, a parent of one of Niklaus's former students, recognized the founder and told a reporter. The story was published on a Wednesday. By Thursday, it had been shared 40,000 times. The headline read, Atlanta teacher, secretly one of the South's wealthiest men, launches $50 million education endowment, named for his father. The article was careful with Niklaus's privacy, but it told enough. The man who had driven a Honda Accord to school for 11 years while quietly building a financial empire. The man who had used the most difficult chapter of his life to fund the future of other people's children. His brother Damon called him at 7 a.m. that Thursday morning. I'm staring at my phone, Damon said. My baby brother. Don't make it weird, Niklaus said. He was in his kitchen, frying eggs. You're on the news, man. You're on the news. I saw. And you sound. You sound like you're cooking breakfast. I'm making eggs, Damon. You want me to sound different because I'm on the news. Damon laughed. A big, full, relieved laugh. The laugh of a man who had watched his brother carry something heavy for months and was now watching him put it down. No, he said. No, I don't. That's exactly who you are. That's exactly who I am, Niklaus agreed. His students at Meridian Charter High School found out on Friday, which was the day Niklaus had been dreading slightly. He'd walked in that morning the same way he always had, pressed slacks, button-down shirt, school bag over one shoulder. And the moment he walked into his classroom, the room had done something he'd never seen it do before. It went quiet. The particular quiet of teenagers who have been planning something. Then Jasmine, the same student who'd been working through the supply and demand problem on the night Olivia called him repeatedly, stood up. We made something, she said. She held up a large poster board, handmade, covered in markers and signatures. It read, Mr. Carter, you always said watch and wait. We watched. We waited. We're proud of you. Every student in the class had signed it. Niklaus looked at that poster for a moment. He was a man who had disciplined himself for 17 years against showing too much. But something in the room, the specific warmth of 30 young people who had learned economics from him, and something else, something harder to name, by watching how he carried himself, broke through. Okay, he said after a moment, voice slightly rough. Okay, thank you. He set his bag down. Now sit down. We have work to do. They laughed. They sat. And Niklaus Carter went back to teaching. The Ethan Carter Education Foundation's first full year of operation reached 3,000 students. Financial literacy workshops. Mentorship programs pairing students with professionals from every field. Scholarship funds. A summer program that Niklaus taught personally for 6 weeks, 5 days a week, in a community center in Southwest Atlanta. He moved out of the rental house in East Point 6 months after the settlement. Not into a mansion, into a 4-bedroom house in the West End neighborhood where he'd grown up. Walking distance from his mother's church, a few blocks from the park where he and Damon used to play basketball. He renovated it himself, with Damon's help, over 3 weekends. It had a study with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a kitchen with a cast-iron skillet that he used every Tuesday morning. His mother, Loretta, came over for Sunday dinners. Isaac, his best friend since high school, came for game nights. His life was not small. It was full in the way that actually matters, not with surfaces, but with people who knew him. The part of the story about love, the part where it turns, came quietly, the way the best things usually do. Her name was Camille Brooks. She was a pediatric nurse who volunteered on Saturday mornings at the financial literacy program Niklaus ran in the community center. She didn't know who he was for the first 6 weeks. She thought he was a very dedicated schoolteacher who happened to be good-looking and who could explain compound interest in a way that made it feel exciting, which she thought was a genuinely unusual talent. She found out the full story the way most people found out about Niklaus, through an article someone sent her. She read it on a Sunday morning. She put her phone down. She picked it back up. She read it again. The next Saturday, she walked up to him after the session ended and said, I read about you. He looked at her. He'd noticed her. He'd been noticing her for 6 weeks. Her easy laugh, the way she talked to the teenagers like they were smart, because they were, the way she organized her session materials with a precision that Niklaus respected instinctively. I read about you, she said again. And I want you to know, I would have thought exactly this of you anyway. Before I knew anything about money. He studied her. The kind of study he gave to the things that mattered. That's a good thing to say, he told her. I mean it, she said. No performance. Just direct. I know you do, he said. That's what makes it good. She looked at him for a moment. Then she smiled. A real smile, no calculation behind it. Are you always this measured? Pretty much, he said. Interesting, she said. They stood in the parking lot of a community center in Southwest Atlanta for 45 minutes talking about everything and nothing, the way two people do when they're not in a hurry, because they're both old enough to know that the conversations worth having don't need to be rushed. She went home. He went home. He sat at his kitchen table in the quiet house with the bookshelves and the cast-iron skillet, and opened his notebook and wrote 2 lines. Something new. Something real. He closed the notebook. Olivia rebuilt, slowly and honestly. She dismissed the remaining staff at the Buckhead property and sold the house a year after the settlement. Quietly, without drama. She moved to a smaller place in Midtown, returned to work in event management at a senior capacity, and gave $30 million to a Birmingham-based educational nonprofit that served communities like the ones Claudette Briggs had grown up in. It was reported as a personal philanthropic act, which it was. Niklaus heard about it through Gerald and said simply, "Good for her." Tariq Calloway lost his real estate license following an ethics investigation triggered by the civil claim Olivia's attorneys filed. He moved out of Atlanta. Nobody Niklaus knew mentioned him again. The foundation's annual dinner, first year, black tie, Atlanta's most significant gathering of educators, investors, and community leaders in recent memory, opened with a video. Niklaus had not approved of the video in advance and was mildly horrified when it began playing on the screen in front of 400 people. It was a slideshow made by his students. Starting with a photograph of a young man in a classroom holding a red pen, all the way through to the community center programs and the sign poster and a picture someone had taken of Niklaus in his kitchen on a Tuesday morning, frying eggs. The room laughed and applauded in the right places. Niklaus sat at the head table next to his mother, Loretta, who was holding his hand and crying without trying to stop, and his brother Damon, who was not crying but whose jaw was set in the way that meant the same thing. When the video ended, Niklaus stood at the podium. He looked out at the room, at Jasmine in the front row, now a sophomore at Georgia State studying finance, at Gerald Odom and his wife, at Isaac, who was grinning at him from the back, at his mother, still holding a tissue, at Camille, 2 tables over, who caught his eye and smiled, quiet, real, no production to it. He thought about his father, about $14,000 and a piece of advice. "My father told me," Niklaus said, into a very quiet room, "that the man who waits and watches beats the man who rushes every time." He paused. "I spent 17 years watching, and what I saw was simple. Money without purpose is just numbers. But money with purpose," he looked around the room, "money with purpose changes the shape of what's possible." He looked at the young people in the front rows. "Every one of you," he said, "came here because someone believed your life was worth investing in. I want you to know something." He leaned forward slightly, and his voice dropped to the register it went when he said the things that actually mattered. "You are. You absolutely are. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And don't let anyone make you believe you can't understand how money works. You can. You will. Because this room is full of people whose whole job is making sure you do." The room rose. 400 people, standing. Niklaus nodded once. He stepped back from the podium. He went and sat down next to his mother. Loretta Carter put her hand on her son's face the way she had since he was a boy. "Your daddy would be so proud," she said. "I know, Mama," Niklaus said. He looked across the room at Camille. She raised her glass slightly in his direction. He raised his in return. Quiet. No rush. The beginning of something that would be built properly, the way everything Niklaus Carter built was built. With patience. With purpose. With love. The world had watched Olivia Carter inherit $900 million and file for divorce from a schoolteacher. What the world hadn't known, what Olivia herself hadn't known, was that the schoolteacher was the quiet architect of the very fortune she'd inherited. That he had built it dollar by dollar with the same discipline he brought to his classroom. That he had never needed to announce himself. That he had simply waited and watched, and when the moment was right, let the truth arrive exactly the way he always knew it would. Some men speak loudly because they are afraid of being forgotten. Niklaus Carter never needed to speak loudly because he knew exactly who he was. And in the end, that was the whole story. I hope you stayed all the way to the end of this one, because you needed to hear it. Like and subscribe, because the next story is one that will stay with you for days. And drop in the comments, where in the world are you watching from?